Hello and welcome to our weekly Facebook Live series, Get to Know the HPO. My name is Abigail Richardson-Schulte and I am composer in residence with the HPO. Well, today we are delighted to have our second violinist, Suhashini Arulanandam. We're going to start off today with a performance. Suhashini will first play an excerpt by a young contemporary American composer by the name of Jessie Montgomery, and this is from her Rhapsody #1. And then right after that, she will play the beautiful and famous Vocalise by Rachmaninoff. So please join me in welcoming Suhashini Arulanandam. Thank you so much, Suhashini. Beautiful.
Thank you.
So that Rachmaninoff was written for high voice and soprano. I particularly like the violin vibrato you put in there for the to match the vibrato, of course, of a singer. What do you like about this piece for violin?
I think there's something that's just so incredibly sad about it, and I think it just, whoever's listening to it, it kind of brings them into that world. And so the reason that I chose this piece was to, I think, reflect the sadness that is currently happening in the world. And also, that's also why I chose a piece by Jessie Montgomery, who is affiliated with the Sphinx Association. The Sphinx organization, which is an organization that supports African American and it supports diversity in music. And I was searching for music that would be appropriate to play during this time, because there are certain things that have been on my mind in the past week, with the murder of George Floyd, and things that have been happening in Toronto as well. And I think I just wanted to bring a little bit of awareness into things that are happening. I think Abby is frozen. So maybe I'll just continue to talk about that. So Jessie Montgomery is a living composer based in New York, and she's a violinist as well. And I actually found this piece a couple of days ago when I was having a conversation with Abby. And I was looking for a piece for violin by a composer of Black heritage. And it wasn't easy. There aren't that many composers who are people of color. And I think that's partly why I wanted to bring this into the mix. And the Rachmaninoff Vocalise I chose, I think, because it reflects a lot of the sadness happening in the world now. And it's a piece that I know well. And I just felt that it expressed the situation that's currently happening in the world. I think we've lost Abby. Anyway, so in the meantime,
Actually, why don't you play some more music for us? Anything that you have, really.
Okay, so I'll play a piece called Salut d'amour, which is by Edward Elgar, and it means love's greeting. I think I need the music a little bit. Rearranging here a little bit.
Beautiful. Thank you, Suhashini.
Thank you.
Sorry for my internet disruption there, but I'm back now. So you jumped in and played the Salut d'amour, right? And interestingly, that was written, I'm not sure if you mentioned this already, but it was an engagement present to his fiancée. And was dedicated to Carice, which was a combination of her names, Carolyn and Alice. So really a beautiful tribute there. If we can get back to a moment for a moment to what I was trying to ask you before I cut out, is being a visible minority in the HPO, and you perform other places, of course, as well. Do you think there are barriers? I mean, of course, in classical music, we have mainly white and Asian players. I'm wondering, in your experience and in your opinion, if you think there are any barriers to people from other cultures entering classical music?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I guess in the spectrum of people of color, there are also kind of differences, I think, in the sense that as another person of color, there's no way that I can relate to what's currently happening in the Black community, for instance, as a South Asian. Although it's under the blanket of racism and discrimination, there are also differences in how each group is perceived. Unfortunately, I don't know how to say it any other way. In terms of it gets very complex. So, and the answer to the question is that I don't know. I think you kind of grow up a certain way and take a lot of things for granted, and that's my normal. And I think only now, at the age of actually 40, maybe in the past 5 years, I've begun to notice certain things. Whereas I think before I would have just thought, okay, just, that's because of something different. That's just the way it is. And certain things could be definitely a mix of things too. It could be a mix of, personality, but also how you're seen, because there are very few people with brown skin playing the violin, and no violin soloists, like internationally known violin soloists, to my knowledge. There is a Black violin soloist, one that I'm aware of, Ty Murray. And I've encountered various South Asians in the orchestral world, but it's always kind of like, oh, there you are. And it's always like a surprise to see that. But in the past couple of years, I mean, there have been definitely things that I've encountered. I thought the easiest way to talk about it would be to talk about a couple of things that I've heard and that I've seen. I went to school in New York, and several times, this happened several times. The conductor at the school, I remember he once was talking about a clarinet player in the orchestra, and he said, oh, she can play the clarinet, but she can't speak English. And not only was that not true, because the person not only spoke English fluently, because I had several, heavy conversations with her, she also spoke at least 2 other languages. I think the thing that he saw was that she looked different and she had an accent. And to him, that meant, oh, she doesn't speak English, which is also kind of neither here nor there. And nobody really called him on it. And this type of thing would happen regularly. And nothing was ever really done about it in that situation. And I mean, that was about 10 years ago, I would say. Yeah, there is still a lot of work to do, and it's very subtle. And it's only now that I'm actually beginning to notice things. I was having a conversation with with some people in a group that I play with, and we were talking about children's books for people. Children's books. So and so plays the violin, so and so plays the clarinet. Just introducing instruments to children, and I think somebody suggested a name like, for instance, Bob the violinist or Jane the clarinetist. And then this lovely woman that I was with said, "Oh, that's such a nice normal name. We need more normal names in books." And
Wow.
I didn't say anything because I didn't want to, be upsetting or hurt her feelings, because she honestly is one of the most amazing human beings that I know, but it just never occurred to her. And it may not even be what she meant. She might have been referring to the kind of trend of the recent trend of names. But what didn't occur to her was that most books that present instruments to young children are already, presenting books with very, very, I guess, quote unquote, normal names.
Mm-hmm.
So I think at some point, like, don't hold me to it, but I'm thinking about at some point creating some kind of book for young children about a little brown girl who plays the violin, because there isn't one.
Yeah,
and the other,
oh no, I think it's very important. It's in a way to showing women in strong roles. When little girls grow up and see that, it becomes something to strive for. So I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Now, what about your own cultural background? Have you explored that musically?
Yes and no. I've definitely, so my father, I think he grew up learning a certain amount of Carnatic music, but not extensively. I think he played the harmonium, and his father played the harmonium. My mother's family grew up playing Western classical music because I think that was all brought to Sri Lanka through colonization and various things. So my whole family on my mother's side has played Western classical classical music, probably like as far back as my grandmother or great grandmother. And so I have explored, Indian classical music, North Indian and Carnatic, and I would love to play it. But it's, I need another lifetime to learn it.
It's extremely complicated. Yes, exactly. So that's interesting. You had that natural flow then into classical music. Can you tell us a bit about your path to becoming a professional musician?
Sure. Yeah, I was actually born in Newfoundland. My parents moved there. My mother was a music teacher in the school system there. And so she would drive me 2 hours to St. John's for my violin lessons every Saturday morning. And I was about 3.5 when I started.
Oh.
And I think it's called the Atlantic Suzuki program. I don't know if their name changed. It's a wonderful Suzuki program. Yeah, they also have a fiddle program, which is interesting.
So did you grow up fiddling then?
I didn't, and that's a funny thing. I would watch all the kids kind of lining up for their fiddle class, and then I would kind of look at them and think, "Oh, why aren't I there?" And so I asked my mother about that years later, and she said, "Oh, well, you never asked to go to the fiddle class." And so I didn't learn how to fiddle. And that was specifically, I think it was Newfoundland fiddle tunes. And Newfoundland fiddle tunes are something that I'm actually not that familiar with, because they're kind of their own thing as well. And my group teacher, Christina Smith, was a little bit like the Bartok of Newfoundland, in the sense that she went around to all the elderly, fiddle players who knew these tunes by ear, and she notated them so that they would be passed down
Right. And the tricky thing about notating things like that, well, I mean, Bartok did a great job of notating them, but a lot of them sort of fall between the cracks and don't necessarily fit exactly into our Western classical notation. So that's not necessarily an easy thing to do. So can you play something for us?
Sure. I'll try. I'm okay. So I started learning a few Irish fiddle tunes. Although not Newfoundland ones. So this is, I'm also apparently not a real fiddler because I need music. This is a tune called Neil Gow's Lament for the Death of His Second Wife, which is less depressing than it sounds. It's a very beautiful tune. And my music is not staying on my stand.
Yeah, I know that tune. You know, when I was in university in Toronto, I spent every Sunday afternoon at the Bow and Arrow pub at Davisville, and they had a Sunday afternoon session with Cape Breton fiddler Sandy McIntyre leading. And I actually made like a 45-minute audio documentary in university about Sandy McIntyre and all these people that come to the Bow and Arrow. And I even joined a little group where I was playing piano. So yeah, I certainly know Neil Gow's Lament for the Death of a Second Wife. It's a great tune. Okay, let's hear it.
It's a great tune.
Nicely done. Love those ornaments. Now, Neil Gow was the most famous Scottish fiddler of the 1700s. And he wrote this when he was 78 years old. Yes, as a lament for the death of his second wife. And then he died 2 years after that. So it's interesting to think of him as this just well-established, loved fiddler writing this at the end of his life. Shirley writes in and says, "Thank you for a very moving few minutes." Lovely. So Suhashini, let's get back to classical music now and your path to becoming a professional musician. So take it away.
Oh gosh, it could be very long or very short, depending on how much I say. So I guess after I moved from Newfoundland and the Suzuki program there to Ontario when I was about 9, and then I started taking lessons with Erica Davidson at the Royal Conservatory. And some people might know Sarah Davidson, who is a harpist in Toronto. I think she's the harpist in the ballet. I forget if it's the opera or the ballet. I think it's the ballet. Erica Davidson. And then I went to the Glen Gould School in Toronto. And I studied with Annalie Petitpetanakoun of the Griffin Trio and Erica Rom. So all, Toronto locals now. And after that, I took a break from studying. So I was about 22 when I graduated from the Glen Gould School. And then the next time I went back to school was 2008. So wait, that doesn't that doesn't tell you much. I think there was around 7 years in between. There were around 7 years in between my undergrad and my master's. So then
Well, sorry, if I can just jump in there. So because of that gap, it obviously wasn't clear to you that you would become a professional musician. So what were you thinking at that point? What were your life plans?
Oh, it was definitely clear. It was definitely clear. But I felt like I wanted more tools. And I felt like I hadn't found the tools that I wanted to. And I was kind of searching for I was searching for the right mentor, the right teacher. And I feel like it's hard to find a true pedagogue whose kind of life life encompassing goal is kind of imparting information.
And it's not necessarily the concert players that are touring the world, right, that make the best teachers.
Absolutely, yeah. It doesn't always go hand in hand, because I think a lot of fantastic players, they may not want to dissect what they're doing to that degree, and figure it out. So I met the teacher that I ended up studying with in New York, Burton Kaplan. He was running something called the Magic Mountain Music Farm in upstate New York.
It's a good name.
It's a good name. A lot of people ask, so what do you guys do there? So it's basically like a practice retreat. And there are only around 12 to 13 people there at once, and you have a lot of personal attention, a lot of time to practice. So I went there, and then I thought, I have to study with this person. So I ended up studying with Burton for 2 years after that. And yeah, and then that was the end of my formal study. But of course, I'm continuing. We never really stop.
Yeah, true enough. So then you became an orchestral player, and I know you play a lot of new music too. But let's just talk about orchestral playing. What do you like about playing in an orchestra?
Whew, it's like being in the middle of this big moving machine of sorts. It can be a huge rush in a very different way than it is to play on your own, which I love playing on my own because there's a certain amount of freedom. What's really interesting about orchestra playing is also how everything is working together. So, the eye contact between, especially I love playing with the HPO because my colleagues are so amazing. And I find that there's a lot of camaraderie. There's a lot of contact. And Gemma on the podium is just, you really kind of get that energy, and she transmits what she's feeling musically so well, and just kind of catching that and rolling with it is pretty awesome, I think.
And how long have you been in the HPO?
I'm going into my 18th season, which, as I say, it seems ridiculous.
You've got 10 years on me, and I thought I'd been there for a while, so that's great.
Yeah. I got the job. It was a bit of a shock. Like, it was actually the first professional audition that I ever took. So I had just finished at Glenn Gould School, and I was playing in the National Academy Orchestra. I knew that I was going to be doing that for the fall, but then I was like, oh, I'll take this audition. And then I got the job, and I was like, oh, okay.
That's amazing. Auditioning is a really brutal process, and my goodness, I mean, a lot of people spend a lot of money to fly across the country and other countries, and line up and do their audition. It can be really heartbreaking. So I can't believe you got it on your first try.
It was. I am extremely lucky. I think more and more, it's definitely something that I'm appreciating. I also have a job in the Windsor Symphony, and I think even though they're not, each of them is not full-time, just having the security of knowing what you're going to have, at least this base during the year, is a great peace of mind. And, you know, my colleagues are all wonderful.
Now, maybe you can give us an idea of what you do outside of playing in orchestra, musically.
Musically. So I don't have my Baroque violin out. I also play Baroque violin. So I've played with Aradia, which is a group that actually I don't think it's functioning anymore. The leader moved to Ottawa. Yeah, I don't do very much professional playing on Baroque violin. Maybe a couple of times a year there will be a Messiah or something. It's something that's much newer to me than modern violin. I started it a lot later in life. What else do I do? Well, there's a group called the Thin Edge Music Collective that I play with maybe once a year or a couple of times a year. And I'll be doing something that we'll be doing not a live stream, but a pre-recorded, we'll be doing a project that will be broadcast later this summer or, you know, September. I'm currently working with Tapestry Opera, which is one of the organizations that didn't shut down, you know, continued to pay their musicians, continued to work and actually rehearse to the best of their ability remotely. We were recording tracks and sending them in for the singers to sing along with. And so we're going to be making a recording soon. What else do I do? There seem to be all kinds of just random projects that pop up that I can't even remember. And some of them are really interesting. Like I had something with a steel pan player. There was an orchestra called the Organic Go Orchestra where we had to improvise. And I would say that was the gig that kind of took me most out of my comfort zone because there were wind players there who were like free improv pros who were just going, I thought, whoa, that's not what I do on a regular basis. So yeah, I seem to get involved with these kind of weird and wonderful projects.
Yeah, interesting. Good for you. Now, before we totally leave the subject of Hamilton here, do you want to give us an idea about, you know, what do you do between rehearsal and concert? Are there any restaurants or places you like to go in Hamilton?
Yeah, I sort of have a ritual of taking a walk by myself. So yeah, that's one thing. I don't really like to socialize too much between the rehearsal and the concert. I kind of go off and I go for a walk, usually down Upper James, and there's a pottery place. So I always go to the farmer's market and just browse and usually get something to eat there. There's also Was, which is an Ethiopian place nearby. What else is there? Oh, so many places. There's a pottery, there's the Mulberry Cafe, which I love for just going and sitting and getting like one of their treats that they have. I keep mentioning the pottery. Yeah, the pottery. So the name of the store is called Store, which I absolutely did not know until I had needed to find out what it was called, but it's got the work of a lot of local Hamilton artists, and it doesn't have only pottery, it has other things too, but because I'm very pottery focused, that's what I remember. I actually have a couple of pieces here. So here is one, and it's really, really beautiful. And this one is by, I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, it's Christine Wendy de Takashi. And I have another one here. I just think the glaze is so awesome on this. Oh, I can't even show you, like this other side. And that is made by Lisa Skog.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have so many great potters in Hamilton. I live in Dundas, and it's a super center for pottery. We have these wonderful pottery shows. Yeah, it's a great place to be for that. By the way, those of you watching, feel free to ask questions to Suhashini along the way. I'm surprised nobody yet has asked you about your instrument, Suhashini, because that's one of the most common questions. What do you play? So I'll ask it.
Sure. Oh, well, actually, my water glass is from Dundas. I unfortunately forget the potter. But so my instrument, it's made by Maurizio Tadioli, a Cremona-based luthier. I'm actually on Facebook with it. Facebook with him. So he's a living maker. This violin is a baby compared to a lot of others. It was made in 2001. And I actually have I didn't mention this when you asked what else do I do. I have a duo called the Tadioli Duo with cellist Sybil Shanahan, who plays on a Tadioli cello, which is made, I think, in 2003 or 4. So they're brothers, we decided. And so we have a duo called the Tadioli Duo, and we play together.
Oh, isn't that great? And I understand you have another duo with your partner, and this would be a good time to bring in him. So let's welcome Nathan. Nathan Pepitas is a percussionist and composer. There he is. Hi, Nathan. Welcome.
Hi, how are you?
Great, thanks. How are you?
Good.
So the question to both of you now, what are you doing at this time? Maybe let's start off with non-musical things. I understand you're doing some gardening and cooking.
Yeah, Suhashini's just dropping her violin on the other side of the shot here. Yeah, so we just started planting our garden. We've had this garden plot in the Christie Pitts Community Garden for, I think this is our 4th season.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
So the first few years was just Suhashini kind of taking charge and doing her thing. But last year we started growing hot peppers, and that's when I got really excited about it. So this year and last year and this year, I was a lot more involved because I was tending to the hot pepper plants, and that's kind of what brought me in.
Can you really eat all those hot peppers? Like, do you grow a ton of them?
Absolutely not. We grew, so last year, this is what we have left from last year's crop. These ones are extraordinarily hot peppers.
I want to show them the shape.
Yeah, they're called Trinidad Scorpions, and they are extraordinarily hot peppers.
They've got a little stinger on the end of them. That's why they're Trinidad Scorpion.
That's great.
And no, you're absolutely right. There's no way that we could eat all of these in the run of a year.
Not all of these. Yeah.
Or even all of these. These ones are habaneros and lemon drops. They're a little bit less, they're more edible.
And do you pickle them as well?
No.
We haven't tried that. We've pickled other things, but not peppers yet. We have a dehydrator. So we've been drying them, but I feel like we could go through these. I feel like we've been like holding off a little bit.
Yeah, that's right. We've been a little bit. I'm worried about getting to, December, January and running out of peppers and having to go through. So I was really careful through the fall about not using them too much, so that now we have some until hopefully we get next year's crop.
Oh, that's great. Just to update you, a couple of comments here. Melanie Ayers, who plays second bassoon in our orchestra, says, "I miss our trips to the market, Suhashini. I think the samosa place left the market." And then Elspeth Thompson, who is a violist and our librarian, says, "The samosa place is now in Dundas." There you go, just to give you an idea that there's a bit of a chat happening at the same time.
I think Elspeth, they're friends of Elspeth's.
Okay.
Samosa owners. Mm-hmm.
Right. So back to your cooking here. So do you explore your cultural roots in your cooking at all?
Yes, I would say probably that's the most that's kind of the place where I'd explore it the most. So I grew up, so my father cooks Sri Lankan food. My mother does not cook very much. Well, we used to make like lemon loaf and sort of meatloaf and other things like that together. We used to bake together. But my dad makes a lot of Sri Lankan food, and usually during the year when there's a lot going on, we come home, we might grab a falafel on the way. It's pretty, it's hard to cook. So
Yeah.
I've been going,
because I imagine, I mean, you're two professional musicians with very different schedules, right? So you don't necessarily collide usually. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, absolutely. Like I think for the first time ever, we've been having, like, every day almost, we've been having lunch and dinner together. And it's
At least dinner.
At least dinner. Yeah, at least dinner. And it's kind of a ritual that we've never had in our lives before.
Yeah, we're definitely ships in the night when it comes to our usual schedules. We've got a shared Google Calendar just so we can keep tabs on what each other is doing, because every week is totally different, right?
That's crazy.
So this has been kind of a nice little change to be able to just have dinner together every night, and like cook dinner together every night and make that happen. So
right.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, if anybody's interested in Sri Lankan cooking, Charmaine Solomon's cookbook, what is it called? The Complete Asian Cookbook, I think. It has, she basically went around the world cooking with people in their home kitchens. And I think she's got authentic recipes, and everything she has in there works. It just works if you follow what she says.
That's good to know. I'll check that out. A couple of comments for you. Neil Spalding, who plays second horn and is our personnel manager and operations manager, writes, "Hey, Suhashini and Nathan, can we bum a few peppers? We're making a Yunnan noodle dish tonight."
Come on over.
And Karen Usha Gray writes, "I had the pleasure of tasting Suhashini's dad's cooking. Delicious."
Oh, I see David Yeager has mentioned it. One of the interesting, weird and wonderful things that I did, there's a wonderful composer, Anna Pigorna, who wrote this beautiful score that she did in beautiful calligraphy on a wooden door. And we played it off of the door.
The door is the
score.
Wow.
Yeah.
The door is the score.
It was with our friend and colleague Ilana Waniuk, another violinist. I'm reading the comments here as well.
That's great. So really, you do some very unusual projects. That's good to know. You're quite an experimental player, I think. Now, let's get to what the two of you do together musically. And I know shortly we're going to play a video of a work you wrote, Nathan. But perhaps you can just tell us a little bit about being two musicians in the same place and getting practice time and having projects separately and apart. How does all of this work together?
Well, I think when this first hit, we started, we are lucky enough that we have a separate studio. And just because Nathan is a percussionist and his stuff isn't as easily movable, he's in there most of the time. And I practice in our living area where we are now. And in terms of recording equipment, I didn't really have any. And we sort of started off thinking that we could share stuff, but that really didn't work. So I ended up having to, get my own interface, my own microphone, my own mic stand, all that stuff. So now we have two sets of decent recording equipment.
Yeah, when everything moved, once the sort of COVID thing hit and everything moved online, we started realizing that we were both teaching online. So we kind of either had to coordinate our schedule so that the gear was available at all times, or just have our own sets. So we have basically two small recording studio sets in our very small house right now in our apartment. And I've got the percussion studio on one side and she's got her violin studio on the other side, with just set up so that we've got two sets of doors between. So hopefully there's not a whole lot of, bleed between microphones and that sort of thing. But
I think that's why it works. Our bedroom is in between the studio and the living space. So there's this buffer. So when he's practicing percussion, I can practice violin at the same time, and it works.
And we can still teach
and record. We can still teach at the same time.
We can still teach and record, because I'm doing a bunch of recording of videos for the school that I teach at. And for my own sort of business that I've put together. But So there's always some recording or online teaching or practice or something of some sort going on. And it's good that we can just have our own spaces to do it. We're very, very lucky. Very, very lucky.
We are very lucky.
Mm.
My student Claire, I just wanted to say
Yes.
hi, Claire. That's so sweet.
That's a nice comment. You're an amazing teacher. Oh, lovely. So what sort of things, I mean, Nathan, you mentioned some videos for teaching. Suhashini, I think you mentioned earlier that you're putting some practicings on Instagram. What sort of things are you doing?
Well, so I joined this 100 days of practice, hashtag 100 days of practice that everybody seemed to be doing. And so I ended up posting like little snippets of technical exercises that I was working on, and just how to do them sometimes, or just, you know, what was going on in my own head, my own sort of thoughts or analysis about, you know, the movement. And recently I started to post a couple of videos that involved my skeleton. Actually, Nathan made eyeballs for this poor creature here, and
I just thought it seemed a little lifeless. I wanted to give it give it some soul.
Does he have a name, or she?
his name is Bob Skeleton. He's a he. Yeah, male pelvis. His name is Bob Skeleton. And there's a strange reason. I feel strange to say this, actually. So there's a pedagogue named Bob Skelton, a well-known Canadian pedagogue, who actually wrote, he's written a scale book that I use for my students. His name is Bob Skelton. And so anyway, I decided to name the skeleton Bob Skeleton. So I'm actually studying something called body mapping for musicians, which, so I've, had various performance injuries. Actually, only two, one when I was 17, one when I was about 34. And in between those two, there was a big learning curve. And so my injury that I had when I was 34, I really went into the body mapping route, and I started to find out all kinds of things about, the body as it relates to pedagogy, like instrumental pedagogy. Well, vocal pedagogy is something that I'm supposed to have an overview to be able to teach this as well. So I would say a lot of what I'm doing is kind of incorporating that knowledge into my practicing, and playing the violin now is actually much easier than it was maybe 5 years ago, since I've been working with this information. So it's a little bit about what I've been posting. Yeah,
interesting. Yeah, it's gosh, there's quite a business and study around musician injuries, right? I mean, we have specialists like John Chong who really focus on musician injuries. So it's interesting you're looking into that yourself. Now, the two of you have made a video, which we're going to see now. And Nathan, this is a piece you composed called On Paper. And I understand it was written pretty recently. Do you want to tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, sure. So it kind of came out of we were in isolation and just kind of making projects for ourselves to keep busy. And I was updating my website and realized that I hadn't actually written and made public any piece of music in years. So I thought I would make a project of writing again, getting back into the process of it. So I wrote this piece, and it's sort of a combination of acoustic elements and pre-recorded elements. And the pre-recorded things are basically stuff that I found, like household things. So there's sort of like a gritty kind of grinding sound that goes throughout the whole piece. And that's just basically me tearing a piece of paper very slowly, very close to a microphone. And then I've stretched that out and turned the of it up. So it has this really sort of grating, kind of tearing feeling in your ears. And there's sort of a jingly bit, and that's just ankle bells that I've recorded, just a sustained jingling. And then I've gradually over the course of the piece slowed it down. So it starts to feel more distant and more grating as it goes on. And then I've added this sort of very spacious, resonant acoustic bit for violin and vibraphone, which is like a mallet percussion instrument similar to a piano. So there's sort of these acoustic elements layered on top of this. this pre-recorded other bit, I guess.
Now, just one more question for you before we hear it. Is it different writing for your partner? I mean, I am married to a violinist, Michael Schulte, and then I sometimes get to write for him. And I find I write very differently. I mean, I know his sound and his style so much that it's just going to be a different piece. It'll be for him. How do you find writing for Suhashini?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'm not really sure. I think like because this goes back to what we were talking about with the like the 2 sets of recording equipment and the 2 studio spaces and that sort of thing, where with the 2 of us being so busy in our own right, actually doing things together is far harder than doing things with people from outside of the household in a weird way. Like you would think it would be really easy to just rehearse together because you live in the same space, but it just aligning that time when we can make it happen is surprisingly difficult for us. So when I was writing this, I was kind of writing for the feel that I wanted for this particular piece, but also keeping in mind something that we could record very easily and not have it be like a big weeks-long project to make this recording happen. Right. So I was very conscious of that when I was writing. But I'm going to be writing another piece for her again for the Thin Edge Music Collective coming up soon. And yeah, I guess just thinking about we both have very different skill sets, and trying to write in such a way that my skill set as a composer, which is very like rhythmically driven and that sort of thing, doesn't put her in a position where she doesn't feel like she can be successful with it, if that makes any sense. Like trying to find the best way to use my skills to make her sound as good as possible.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Good. Exactly. Now let's listen to this now. But before we do, just to give you a heads up, Suhashini, we've had a question for you from Daryl Dockstader, who's one of our regular audience members, especially in the community. And he asks, what kind of bow do you prefer? And please describe the components. So we'll get to that afterwards. Just wanted to give you a heads up. So everybody will come back to that question. But for right now, let's listen to On Paper by Nathan Pepitas, with Nathan performing with Suhashini. Here it is. Wow, thank you so much for that. We have a comment which sums it up so nicely. Pat Dickinson writes, beautiful production, impressive music, and photography. Beautiful. Nathan will put up a link to your website, so thank you so much for that. If anybody has any specific questions about the piece, please go ahead. I'm so glad to know that was a piece of paper tearing. That's quite an effect. Yeah.
Yeah, I was impressed with the sound I could get out of it because it's such a simple sound. But once I started manipulating it, it was cool.
It's very rich. Yeah. Elaine writes, fascinating. And we have some applause here from our HPO team. So that was really great to see. Suhashini, let's leave off with one last question for you about the bow. Please tell us about your bow and some of the components.
Some of the components. So this is a hill bow. I'm not quite sure what to say. I know that there's a number. If you remove the hair, there is a little number here. So hill bows were produced by various people, and you can tell by looking at the little number that's underneath the hair. And I remember looking it up once, but I forget what who it was who actually made my bow. I think it was made in the early 20th century. By components, I'm not sure what is meant. Daryl, if you're there, what do you mean by the components? Do you mean the weight of? I'm not sure. So I'm not sure what the weight of the bow is. I tend to prefer bows that are maybe a little on the top heavy side more than others. It's a Pernambuco bow. It's got an ebony frog and mother of pearl eye, and I forget what this part is called. Yeah, I guess that's about it. It's a hill bow. It's an English bow made of Pernambuco.
There we go. I think that sums it up. Thank you.
All right.
We have another comment here from Ethan Wang, who I believe that was Claire, your student. That was amazing. The production and the sound was amazing. So that's a nice note to end on. Thank you, Suhashini and Nathan, for joining us today. This has been a great glimpse into your lives and your music. So thank you so much for that. For those of you joining, I hope you'll join us next week. We'll be speaking to David Pell, who is our principal trombonist of the orchestra. So please think of some questions for Dave and write them in advance and tune in next week. So thank you very much, and bye, Suhashini and Nathan.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much.